So I'd actually made a launch day embargo video around the Panasonic Lumix S1II and S1II, but the sound was kind of messed up, so I didn't end up releasing the video on that day. I'll still put that video, like a 16 or 20-minute ramble, at the end of this video. If you're curious, you can see the long form version of this. But I thought I would do just a quick sort of synopsis if you want me to just get to the point. There's already plenty of videos on these cameras. The internet's on fire with them. I don't have that much to add, just a couple of points. First, I want to say I think these are really, really good cameras. If you're in the Panasonic Lumix ecosystem, it kind of seems like a no-brainer to get one or both of those cameras if you don't already have the S1R Mark II, especially. But, where I land is I actually bought the S1R Mark II, so I'm wondering, do I want to go out and sell this guy, buy the S1II or S1II, and go through that whole painful, gas cycle process? I should also tell you that I got the Nikon Z6III like a week before the S1II announcement, okay? I've already made a short making the joke, the obvious joke, that the Z6III effectively is the S1II in terms of hardware. We'll get into the differences and features in a second here, but, basically the Z6III is the same camera for $1,100 less. And then the S1II is basically the Nikon Z5 II with the same, spread in feature difference. So before I get into features, I just want to talk about what kind of annoys me about this and why I haven't put in a pre-order for the S1 Mark II just yet. It's Panasonic Lumix's product strategy. I feel like their roadmap, if they even have one, is just all over the place, okay? They've done this kind of thing before, where they released the G9 Mark II Micro Four Thirds camera that was supposedly a photocentric camera that was largely a video camera, It's in the S5 II body, which is kind of a video hybrid body, if you ask me. Or at least a video first hybrid body. You can take decent photos, but let's be honest, mostly video shooters use those cameras. And then 2-3 months later, they released the GH7, which is basically the perfect Micro Four Thirds video camera, effectively rendering the G9 II obsolete as compared to the GH7, right? The GH7 has pretty much all of the G9 II's photo features, and then it has almost every video feature you could want in a hybrid body non-cinema camera. And then here we are, 2025, and Panasonic does the same freaking thing. They released the S1R2, and then 3 months later, they released the S1II, which on a lot of fronts, and according to a lot of YouTubers, is a better camera, especially for video, kind of rendering the S1R2 almost obsolete. Yes, it has higher resolution. Some photo shooters might want that, but in terms of video, rolling shutter performance, the S1II is the better camera, kind of rendering this guy obsolete. I don't think I'm going to get nearly what I paid for with this camera because the S1II is out there. I doubt I'll be able to sell the S1R2 to an individual. I'll probably have to sell it to MPB or KEH or use Photo Pro at a pretty significant, cut from the new price. If I had to guess, $2,500, $800 below what I paid for it, not more than 3 months ago, if that. And then also, it almost seems like Panasonic doesn't want to sell you these cameras. If you go on their website, the S1II, S1II, and the new 24-60 f2.8 lens, which looks pretty interesting, like a smaller, more compact, normal length zoom, pretty interesting. None of those are listed on Panasonic's website. You got to really dig to find a page where they're listed, and when you do, which is like 2 or 3 page clicks deep, the new cameras are listed at the very bottom of the list of cameras. The S1R2 still appears to be the flagship camera and is listed first in their digital full-frame camera lineup. It's nuts. It's like Panasonic doesn't even care about alienating its customers, kind of like releasing cameras at weird intervals. And they also don't care about selling them. You can barely even find the cameras in their shop on their website. Other camera companies have done this so much better. Right? Fujifilm released the XH2S and let everyone know an XH2 was coming. These are very analogous to the Panasonic cameras, right? The S1R is the XH2, and the S1II is kind of like the XH2S. In this case, I feel kind of blindsided, right? I think most people were expecting, and there were like rumors, I think, circulating that it was going to be the S1R2 and then the S1H2. There wasn't going to be an S1II. And then lo and behold, within months of releasing the S1R2, and people spending their hard-earned $3,300, they released in the camera. Kind of makes me wonder, is the S1H2 coming in 3 months? For that reason alone, almost, I'm going to wait just to see. I would hate to spend $3,100 on the S1 Mark II and then have the S1H Mark II, which probably is going to be a fully stacked sensor, camera, even better for video and fast shooting. If that comes out in like 3 months, I would be annoyed if I put my money into the S1II. Fell for the same trap, What is it like? Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you. This might be a shame on you moment, Panasonic. I'm just saying. And the other kind of issue I have with this launch is the pricing. The Z6III is on sale right now, so it's $1,100, more than $1,000 cheaper than the S1 Mark II. Similarly, the S1II is like $800 more expensive than the Nikon Z5II. So, my last point on this is I think really which camera you go with depends on which feature set you care about more. In my opinion, if you care more about photo, the Nikon is almost certainly the better value because it's so much cheaper than the Panasonic camera. However, on the other hand, there are some video features that, do make the Panasonic cameras more compelling. I don't know if they're $1,100 more compelling, but it is more compelling and probably makes your life quite a bit easier if you're a video first shooter. So in terms of, features that the S1II Mark II and the S1R Mark II have that the Z6III doesn't have, it's things like Bluetooth timecode. You can match up a whole bunch of cameras very easily. Anamorphic support, both D-squeeze and anamorphic IBIS. That's so nice. Open gate recording. I don't think it's that big of a deal. For everything but anamorphics, all you got to do is take 2 steps back and you get the same framing. I guess if you're a social media content creator, it's nice to be able to cut it down. But for me, if I'm doing vertical and I need high-res images, I'm going to flip the camera to get the full resolution of the sensor. That's just me. But I do see how with anamorphics, having open gate does give you a bigger image frame to work with, and I get it. That makes sense. I have the GFX 100 Mark II. The anamorphic stuff on that is fantastic because you can shoot open gate on it. And a whole bunch of other, frame aspect ratio perspectives as well. It's really neat. And then the S1II and S1R Mark II have some hardware features the Z6III doesn't. Primary among them, a screen that flips up and out, right? The Z6III only flips out. And then it has a nice spinny wheel that's also a D-pad. I think that's the best implementation of a back wheel in the business. The Nikon only has a D-pad. The S1II series has a lock here, which is nice. Not a big deal, but it's nice to have. And then on the photo side, Nikon has some pretty distinct advantages. For me, by far, the biggest one is the size of the lens mount, the Z mount. I can adapt all kinds of lenses on this camera. I've got a Sony lens on here right now, and it works totally like a native lens. Autofocus, metering, EXIF data, all that stuff. I can adapt Canon EF lenses. I've got an adapter coming that will let me adapt Fuji X mount lenses. And then, of course, you can always adapt manual focus lenses like Leica M and Leica R lenses. PL lenses, all kinds of stuff. Just a super flexible mount. I love adapting lenses, and I love the flexibility that the Z6III and the Z series in general allow me. The other big advantage I think the Nikon has, a more enjoyable and more consistent experience, especially in photo. Like on the video side, it's got autofocus in all frame rates. I don't think there's any crop modes, at least in the Z8. I'm not sure about the Z6III, but it's just a very kind of reliable, you don't have to think about it, consistent camera. And the photo experience is just that little bit more enjoyable. Things are kind of in the right place on the layout. I think the grip and the grip material especially is just a little bit nicer. The overall build quality feels quite a bit more premium than the Lumix cameras. The Lumix cameras feel quite plasticky to me. And you could just kind of tell that Nikon has that like photo camera, decades of experience DNA in its cameras. You're just more likely to want to go out and shoot this for photo, especially, than a Lumix camera. The Lumix camera is kind of in the Sony camp where it just feels like a computery square box of a tool, you know? Excellent features, great tech, great software features in the case of Lumix, but you know, I wouldn't say as inspiring. The Nikon kind of makes me want to go out and shoot. As I noted, you know, the Nikon back screen isn't as good. The D-pad isn't as good. No sensor protector on the sensor here. So when, like, you can yank the battery out when the camera's on and it'll leave the sensor protector down if you absolutely need to protect the sensor from dust. But it's annoying that there isn't a feature in this where the shutter comes down to protect the sensor and keep dust off of it. They did it in the Z8, they did it in the Z9, they know how to do it, they just need to implement it here. Clearly Lumix can do it, it's the same sensor, so it's not like a sensor thing, it's just a code thing, I think. You know, maybe Nikon slightly cheaped out on the shutter, it's not a carbon fiber shutter like the Lumix, but, you know, honestly, it just seems like a couple lines of software they need to put in there. But yeah, the Nikon is just snappy, just feels like pop, pop, you know, like it just feels like it's made for photo. You know, another big thing I don't see a lot of YouTubers talking about, especially on the photography side, is hot shoe flash compatibility. Lumix cameras can only use Godoc flashes natively. They can't even use the Leica Pro Photo adapter. Trust me, I've tried. At least not for TTL, you know, auto functions. That seems crazy. They're both in the Element Alliance. They should have figured that out. Whereas on the Nikon, I think the Nikon might have the most universal hot shoe, and there's like a command module thing you can put on the top of the camera for Nikon for pretty much every system. Pro Photo, Elinchrom, however you say it, Godox. Broncolor, which is what I use, you know, I would have to forget changing out lenses. I would have to change out my whole flash setup if I went with Lumix for photography, right? Because there's no trigger that works with Broncolor and Lumix, at least not currently. That also kind of goes for the lens ecosystem, right? Besides all the adaptability of the Nikon's got a cracking set of telephoto lenses, and it's got the Z8 and Z9, fully stacked sensor cameras that can shoot fast and really take advantage of those telephoto lenses. So, you know, that's just a couple of examples where I think the Nikon system's a bit more fleshed out, even though the L-mount Alliance has made some really nice advances. They don't have a super fast shooting camera, and they don't have a lot of those more fringe, you know, options like long telephoto lenses. Of course, it is missing a lot of those video features that the Lumix has. You know, like I mentioned, I think, you know, like false color, you know, Bluetooth time code, all that stuff that I mentioned, open gate, anamorphic support. So yeah, I don't know that the S1II really changes anything in the grand scheme of things. I think if you're a photo first person, there's probably not enough joy in the photo experience of the S1II that you would switch from Nikon or Canon or maybe even Sony. But on the video side, you know, if you're a video shooter, Lumix is still a great choice. And they're really starting to pull up neck and neck to Sony, you know. Would I say that the S1II is an FX3 killer? I don't know about that, you know. There's still some advantages the FX3 has over the S1II. And really, I think it just boils down to open gate, which again, I don't think is that big of a feature. You just take 2 steps back if you need that framing, you know. You're still going to be cropping the image and lowering the resolution, so whatever, you know. But it's nice to have. But, you know, where I think it gets really interesting, especially on the video side, is that like the S1II shows where Sony's got to come out with all these video monitoring features, time code, all that stuff, and put them in their cameras, just like they have in their cinema cameras. They've got the code, they just got to put it in the cameras. And then further, it really does kind of expose how much further Nikon's got to come with its cameras, right? This has got waveforms, it's got shutter angle, but then it's missing anamorphic support, it's missing open gate. I don't think that it has a good time code thing, you know? So hopefully, you know, the bigger, more global effect, the ripple effect of the S1II is that it pushes all camera manufacturers to put all of these video features in their cameras. So in a nutshell, you know, am I going out and pre-ordering the S1II? Probably not. I will definitely rent it and compare it to the Z6III. That is definitely in the cards. But I don't know that I want to risk $3,100 and losing like $1,000 of that when the S1H2 comes out, possibly in 3 months, you know? And I'm not totally convinced that I need all of those video features the Lumix cameras have when I'm more of a photocentric shooter myself. And I think that's where this kind of shakes out, right? If you're photocentric, I don't know if the S1II, S1IIe, or S1R Mark II are compelling enough for you to switch into the Lumix and L mount ecosystem. I think a lot of the mirrorless camera manufacturers, Canon, Nikon, and like, Sony was already kind of there, are making big strides in the video area. Fuji has a lot of these features. If we're being honest, Fuji gets overlooked. Fuji's got open gate, just saying. But I think these camera manufacturers will probably catch up with those software features in the next generation or two. So, it's hard to say jump to Lumix now when the photo experience is arguably not as enjoyable as those other cameras. But on the video side, I think Lumix is pretty much caught up and maybe is even leading the industry right now. And that's really exciting. Hopefully that pushes the industry forward to catch up to Lumix, in those video features. And I could see if you're a video shooter, why you would switch to Lumix and the L mount right now. So, if you're a photo person, stick with your Nikon and your Canon. If you're a video person, Lumix and Sony are still leading the pack, but Lumix is maybe even starting to pull ahead now. Kind of an interesting moment. We'll see what happens. Sony's rumored to release some cameras at the end of the month that may leapfrog them again. If Sony has open gate, they basically had all these other video features that the Lumix has, and so they have that, open gate, those features, waveforms, all that stuff, shutter angle. And then some new technological advances, guess what? Sony pulls ahead again, and it's a really tough choice between Lumix and Sony. So, again, that's kind of why I'm hitting a pause on going further into the L-mount stuff right now. It's really interesting and kind of exciting time. But yeah, photo, don't know if I would go for it. Stick with, Canon, Nikon, etc. Fujifilm GFX system is fantastic for photography. I'm looking at my GFX 100 Mark II right there. And then for video, you'll be very happy with the Lumix, but you might want to wait and see what Sony does the next couple weeks. So I hope this little ranticle, this little synopsis, my longer rant was helpful. Here's the longer rant, like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye. So today, Panasonic Lumix announced the S1II, the S1IIe, and a 24-60 f2.8. Is the S1II just a Nikon Z6III in a different body with like open gate features and some anamorphic support? And a shutter that comes down? Is the S1IIe just an S5II and an S1 body? And why isn't anyone talking about the lens they released? That seems like the most exciting part, potentially. Let's talk about it. So first, let's talk about the competition, right? I've got my S1R Mark II, and we'll talk about product strategy a little bit later in the video and how I feel as an owner of the S1R2 about this S1II release. When I say this camera, I'm talking about the S1II. I'm just holding the S1R because that's what I actually have here. But I think the best way to talk about the S1II is actually to compare it to the Nikon Z6III, which came out, a few months ago, I think even last year. And right now, it's more than $1,000 cheaper than the S1II and has the exact same sensor. So what are you getting for that $1,100 more if you buy the S1II and you choose that over this camera? Well, the Z6III doesn't have a sensor protector, so when you turn the camera off and take off a lens, the sensor is naked. That particularly drives me nuts with Nikon cameras because A, there is a workaround. If you leave the camera on and yank the battery out, that will actually leave the shutter down in most cases. So you can change the lens without getting dust on your sensor, but it's not ideal. It seems like something they could easily put into software. Further, the Z8 and Z9 have shutter protectors where they do this. So Nikon even has the code lines to put into the Z6III so the stupid shutter will come down. I understand the S1 series have like carbon fiber shutters and maybe Nikon cheaped out on the shutter a little bit and it's not carbon fiber, I don't know. Still, I would like to have the option of putting the shutter over the sensor to protect it from dust when I'm changing lenses. I also don't love that you have to change Nikon lenses this way instead of this way like every other camera, but that's a minor nit. The Z6III doesn't have a button lock like the S1 series cameras do. It doesn't have the 5-axis tilting screen that goes out and then to the side as well. It just goes to the side on the Z6III. There's a whole raft of video features missing from the Z6III. It doesn't have anamorphic support. IBIS doesn't work in conjunction with anamorphic D-squeeze, which the Z6III doesn't have, so it can't work in conjunction with it because it doesn't have it, The IBIS, of course, is better on the Panasonic cameras. They have industry-leading IBIS. The Nikon IBIS is okay. It's just not as good as the Panasonic's. Similarly, it doesn't have a focus transition feature. The Z6III doesn't have false color. And like, this is a weird thing, but it doesn't have an exposure meter in video. So check this out. If you look on the side of the screen here, there's no exposure meter. If I switch to photo, boom, the exposure meter shows up. Why does it disappear in video? That kind of thing annoys me so much, and it also shows that Nikon isn't like all the way there yet with its video features set. Now, let's talk about features the Z6III has that the S1 series cameras don't necessarily have. The Z6III has a number of photo features like, eye tracking and manual focus, the ability to put your IBIS to a different focus point around the sensor, and a number of like more photo-centric features that the S1R doesn't have. And that's kind of the tale of these two cameras, right? The Nikon is more advanced in photo, and then the Lumix is way more advanced in video. To wit, I like the shutter sound of the Nikon much better. Listen to this. Going along with the fact that Nikon powers up faster and is just kind of a snappier camera in photo, that shutter just feels like you're sniping. And then the Lumix shutter sound, while still fairly snappy, is a little more ponderous. And truthfully, the S1R2 at least, and I'm guessing the other S1 cameras, because the S5II this was true pretty much of it also, is a little bit more ponderous of a camera, especially in photo. Panasonic made a huge jump between the S5II and the S1R2, and I assume the S1II, in terms of power-up speed, but it's still just like a little slower and a little less snappy than the Nikon, especially in photo. Also, I just feel like, Nikon learned this lesson from Leica way back in the day in like the 50s, and they just have like a little more soul in the experience, the shooting experience. The grip is just like a little bit nicer feeling. The camera feels like a little more solidly built. It's just a more enjoyable shooting experience. The Panasonic kind of feels like a real workhorse tool of a camera. And the Nikon does, absent the missing video features, which are kind of painful. It's a little painful to shoot video on the Nikon cameras, if I'm being honest, as compared to the Panasonic cameras. But I don't know, there's just something about the Nikon that makes you want to reach for it and shoot more than the Panasonic cameras, at least in my opinion. I think overall, Nikon has a more interesting lens ecosystem, especially on the telephoto end of things. Plus, it has the Z8 and Z9 fully stacked sensored cameras that can rip fast photos with those telephoto lenses. The L mount, including the S1 series, doesn't really have a fast shooting camera and has very limited telephoto options. Basically, the Sigma, like whatever it is, 150 to 600, that new 300 to 600, like that's it. Not much in native mount, Panasonic or Leica lenses. But I guess Sigma is technically a native mount, so whatever. But because of the large opening of the Z mount, you can adapt all kinds of lenses to the Nikon. And if you watch this channel, you know I love to adapt lenses. I can adapt my M lenses to the Nikon Z mount cameras. I can put Sony lenses on the camera with autofocus and all the electronic contact functionality. I can put Voigtlander lenses on there. I can even put Fuji X mount lenses on there with full functionality, allegedly. I actually ordered that adapter from eBay, so I'm really interested to see, if that works. That could be a really interesting thing, using Fuji, X, crop sensor glass on Nikon cameras. Just kind of an interesting thing. You can't do that on the L mount because of the smaller opening on the cameras. Smaller lens mount opening on the cameras. Things that both of these cameras have are hope for the future. With Nikon, they bought Red last year, and I'm hoping all the video features they're missing, which are present in Red cameras, will trickle down to the Nikon Z hybrid cameras. That might catch them right up and have them even surpass Lumix cameras. Similarly, on the Lumix side of things, they still haven't released the S1H2. It's kind of annoying how they've done this. And again, I'll talk more about product strategy and product roadmap in a second here. But, the S1H2, if the S1II is any indicator, the S1H2 is going to be a monster. I'm guessing it's just going to be the fully stacked sensor version of the S1II, which again has the partially stacked sensor of the Z6III. But we'll see. Exciting things. It could be a box camera. It could have internal NDs. There's so many possibilities for the future. Love that hope for the future that these possibilities engender. Both cameras have shutter angle. Both cameras have some kind of picture profiles, although like the LUT feature on the Panasonic is a little more fulsome. Frankly, I don't use any of that. I'll have another video coming out. I found that the flat profiles in the Nikon, the flat monochrome and the flat color, are like just perfect for me. So, you know, I'm like literally the opposite of someone that uses that stuff, but they both have it. Similarly, they're both missing highlight blinkies in photo, like during live view. So while you're shooting, if you blow out highlights, like in a Leica camera or a Fuji camera, like the XM5 I'm filming on, you know, the highlights will actually blink black and white while you're shooting. And I love that you can kind of fix that on the fly. You don't need to look at the histogram. You know, you don't have to use all these other video monitoring tools. It just tells you. Zebras, it just tells you. Nikon does have like a picture profile workaround that kind of works that way, but I want to use that with my chosen picture profile, the flat profile, and Nikon does not offer that because it's not a native feature. And then also, I love what both of these cameras kind of mean for the camera industry. They're both pushing them forward, especially the S1II with its extra video features, right? These are video features that Sony doesn't have natively in the camera. Now, admittedly, a lot of the Lumix features, like anamorphic D-squeeze, you know, you can get if you just put a monitor on pretty much any mirrorless camera. That's true of Nikon, Canon, and Sony cameras, but it is nice that it's in the camera, and Sony ain't got it. Canon doesn't really have it. Nikon doesn't really have it, you know? They need to catch up. So, you know, because Sony hasn't released a camera in a while, I have to wonder if they're seeing this and they'll put these features in, say, the A7 when it comes out. If not, they will actually be behind Panasonic Lumix in some ways. Certainly the sensor technology or whatever will be better in the Sony, but in terms of like actual in-camera video features, they might be behind. Same kind of story with the rumored Canon R6 III, right? Like if that doesn't have false color, all these other things, anamorphic D-squeeze, open gate, they're going to be behind, you know? Same thing with the Nikon. I feel like Nikon could just update the Z6 III with a firmware update, since it's the same sensor as the S1II, and give it some level of open gate. Especially, like, it would be great if these cameras had all these, like, you know, 4K 60 open gate, you know, whatever it is, 6K open gate that the S1II has now. That's really pushing the industry forward. The anamorphic D-squeeze thing, cool, but you can do it on a monitor. The open gate thing is a very useful feature. It's not something I use all the time, but it's a nice to have, and it seems like it's just a little bit of software coding to get it. So I hope it pushes the industry forward and all cameras get it, Fuji too. I've kind of already talked about this, and this doesn't really change from the S1R2 to the S1II. But, you know, it does make the Panasonic cameras, not unlike the Nikon cameras, kind of unique in that they have a really good upgrade path, right? Both have like an everyday carry camera, you know, sort of entry-level version, both of which I have problems with, and I wish they had a better version, but, you know, the Nikon is the ZF, Panasonic has the S9. Then you have like a couple of workhorse cameras, the Z6III, the Z8 for Nikon, you know, the S1R and S1II for Lumix, and then there is a cinema path upgrade, right? Nikon's got Red now, and then Lumix has, like, you know, I'll say the Blackmagic cameras, the L-mount cameras, right? The Pixis, whatever it is, 12K looks pretty sick. So that path is there now for two camera brands that a year or two ago that wouldn't have been true for necessarily, right? Like Canon kind of had that locked up, but their Canon's kind of missing that everyday carry camera, so maybe not. And then Sony definitely did, right? They have the A7C II and the A7CR, and then like the A1II, the A7R5 as the workhorses. Then they've got all their cinema cameras, FX3, FX6, Burano, Varenis, whatever, you know. So it's nice to see these other camera companies catching up on that upgrade path mentality. So having said all that, am I going to buy the S1II? Probably not. And there's a couple reasons why that is. First, Panasonic's product strategy seems all over the map. They've done this kind of thing before, right? They released the S9, which was like an okay photo camera and an okay video camera, but it was the best that they had at the time. So a lot of people went out and bought it. And then a couple of months later, they released the GH7, which is like a way better video camera. And it kind of rendered the S9 II totally useless almost, especially if you're a video shooter. And they've repeated this mistake again, right? They released the S1R2, which is like kind of a good photo camera, but you know, it's got all these issues in video, rolling shutter, and like honestly, the photo experience in Panasonic is still a little lacking as compared to like Nikon or Canon or maybe even Sony, definitely compared to Leica. And then there's compromised video features because of the photo sensor in there, right? Rolling shutter and all the stuff the internet was crying about. And then here we are 3 months later, and they released the S1II, which is like a way better hybrid camera. It's got the partially stacked sensor, which is still pretty good in photo, and then it's excellent in video now. It's got like all of the like, you know, open gate, high frame rate modes you would have wanted in the S1R2, and I'm pretty sure the S1R2 is going to be hard to resell now because no one's going to want to buy it. They're going to want to get the S1II. So I'm sort of stuck with this photo camera that I was really just using for video mostly. You know, I tried it for photo, I didn't love it. That's why I went and bought the Z6III, you know. So that's like a really frustrating thing. On top of it, like they announced 2 cameras that are kind of the same but different. You know, the S1IIe really is just an S5II in the S1 body. You know, if I was an S5II shooter, I'd be annoyed, but I probably would upgrade to the S1II E because the body style is so much better. Not to mention the much better EVF. You know, and the price point's not bad, like $500 more. That's a worthy upgrade in my mind. But it's confusing when you release it next to the S1II, which is probably $1,000 overpriced, right? You're only differentiating between cameras in your own lineup, not against other cameras in the industry, your competitors. And then on top of that, that 24 to 60, not 70, 2.8, if it's really small and compact, but has S Pro line, like image quality, that's a really exciting lens and a good idea. I would rather have a small, super compact zoom like that than their big honking 24 to 70 S Pro, which is like the size of a medium format lens or bigger, you know, which they're also not discontinuing. They're going to sit next to each other. You know, I feel like that should have been the bigger news story almost. It goes across, it can be used across all cameras. So like, I just don't, you know, why didn't they make a bigger deal of that? Or why didn't they give everyone they gave an S1II or an S1IIe that lens as well to test? It just like doesn't make sense. Do they not have enough models? Are they not really prepared for this yet? I don't understand the release timeline. I don't understand the product release strategies. Where the heck is the S1H2? You know, WTF? Panasonic? You know, that's the camera everyone wants. Why are you releasing like, and that's the fear here too, right? That like in 3 more months they're going to release an S1H2, which will render not only the S1R2 but also the S1II and S1IIe basically valueless because everyone's just going to want the S1H2. You know, what the heck, Panasonic? And then as I've kind of said before in this video, I just feel like the Nikon has a little more soul when shooting in photo, and I'm more of a photo person. You know, the extra manual focus features, the ability to adapt all kinds of lenses, including M glass and autofocus E-mount Sony glass, you know, really makes the Nikon compelling on the photo side for me, and it's just a more enjoyable shooting experience on photos. You know, if I were more of a video shooter, and if you're a video shooter, the S1 cameras, S1II, S1R2 are like way better. The video experience on the Nikon is frustrating because it's missing so many things. The menu's kind of disorganized. They still have some work to do there. But, you know, for here and there ad hoc video shooting, it is serviceable. It's capable enough now. You can get the job done with the Nikon, and that may be enough for me, you know, especially in combination with my Fuji cameras here, shooting on the XM5. I have the GFX 100 and the 100 RF, still working on that video, still conflicted about that camera. But yeah, for those reasons, I probably am going to stick with the Z6III I just bought, like, you know, however many days before the S1II was announced. But I think that's probably still a better fit for me. You know, I will certainly rent the S1II and compare it to the Z6III. I'm really curious about that. So more on that. But yeah, I'm not putting a pre-order in for the S1 Mark II because I'm kind of frustrated about getting basically stuck with the S1R Mark II. The photo experience in the Z6III is better, but I will rent it. I will check it out. I will compare them because I am curious. And more to come on this topic. So what are your thoughts? Are you pumped about the S1II? Is it this like, you know, wonderkin of a camera that all the YouTube, you know, shills are talking about? Gerald Undone certainly seemed to like it. You know, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Is it a mistake keeping the Z6III? Should I just like return it now? I'm still in the return window and use that money for a pre-order for the S1II? Let me know. You know where to put the comments. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.